taxes, tariffs, and your stack. Are they equal? Will there be conflict? And your stack. What's up, everyone? Tiger Stacker here. Today is January 19, 2025, the day before the inauguration of President Trump as the 47th president. I decided to do this video, and it will probably come out after the inauguration, but the inauguration is not the main purpose of this video. You see, Mr. Trump has promised many things, and I believe that he has every intention on keeping all of his promises. And I've been thinking about many of the policies that will affect us, how his policies will affect our ability to take care of our families, buy food, gas, heat in the wintertime, air conditioning in the summertime, the basics that we all should have as United States citizens. We have seen the higher taxes, and we've been promised lower taxes, and also to have more financial fiscal responsibility to support our nation, which has grown weaker. Mr. Trump has promised lower taxes, and he's also planned on using something called tariffs so as to support our economy of this great land. So that is the topic for today. I have no crystal ball. I am not a financial advisor. I'm extremely intelligent, but I have not the wisdom of Solomon, nor the omnipotence of God. What I do know is that history often repeats itself. Will history repeat itself completely? Will it repeat itself with variations? This movie is not played out yet. We are just now getting ready to buy our tickets and watch what happens over the next 4 years. Not only to what happens to our country, but what happens to each of us, each of you, all your families, and not being able to see the future. As always, like most people, I look back to the past and try to use the intelligence that God has given me to anticipate the future, like many of you. So I want to go over this topic of tariffs versus taxes. I want to discuss the pros and cons of each. I don't want to tell you what to believe. I don't want to tell you what to do with your stacking careers, how to take care of your families. That is your personal choice. I do me. You do you, but we are all part of a community, and we need to stick together, and we need to learn from the mistakes of the past, distant, not so distant, and what will be the past as time unfolds at this movie. I will present the facts as I have researched them, and once I disclose what I have researched, it is up to you to decide how this impacts you, your family, your friends, your community, your financial goals, your financial needs, and how you are going to stack for food, water, shelter, protection, gold, silver, cash, and everything else that you need to take care of you and your family, and also take care of this country. President Trump has promised to start using tariffs more and taxes less. I think to some degree to improve the finances of this country, to some degree to use it as leverage to bring businesses back home. We used to be a powerhouse nation. We produced our own goods and services. Other countries look to us to help them, and we have given that up over decades. So I want to show you a lot of things that would happen. Remember, we produced our own goods and services, our own food, our own products, and we exported rather than imported. And a lot of the changes that had happened over the decades has weakened our economy. We are no longer a mainly exporting nation. We are more an importing nation. We rely on other countries due to something that was pushed through things as globalization, the NAFTA agreement, and many others. This has made us weaker. This has led us to what has happened today. So let's talk about taxes and tariffs. What is a tariff? A tariff is a tax or a duty to be paid on a particular class of imports or exports. In simple terms, tariffs are taxes imposed by one country on goods imported from another country. What are taxes? Taxes is a compulsory contribution to the state revenue levied by the government on workers' incomes and business profits, added to the cost of some goods, services, and transactions. Higher taxes dampen the consumer spending. So the more taxes you have to pay, the less you have to support your family, which often leads to going from a one-income family to a two-income family, and a two-income family to working extra jobs. You can also say that tariffs might actually do this also, but let's explore that. Let's talk about the history of tariffs. When did they start? The new government of the United States needed a way to collect taxes from all the states, and it was easy to enforce and only had a nominal cost to the average citizen. The tariff of 1789 was the second bill signed by then President George Washington, imposing a tariff of about 5% on nearly all imports with a few exceptions. So let's look at some of the history of what tariffs has done. The tariffs have produced a good level of economy for the United States from the beginning until the changes started around 1912. Notice at this point, income tax started to happen. Why is that important? Is that not when the leading financiers and bankers throughout our country got together in 1910 on Jekyll Island and got the Federal Reserve Act to be passed in 1913, and yet look at what happened. Income tax went up, as well as tariffs, and then later payroll tax started happening. By the time 1944 came around, and notice what happened during the Roaring '20s, and then the Great Depression, and then during the 1940s, income tax reached an all-time high, added by the payroll tax and tariffs. All of this was difficult for the people because with the increased tariffs, you had increased expenses, but you also had increased income, all of which was decreasing the person's ability to pay for their family. And then slowly over time, taxes started coming down, but payroll taxes pretty much stayed up, and tariffs were still high, but were slowly trend down. Let's look at the tariffs, just an example, between France to the United Kingdom and the USA. The tariffs from France were going up around the 1940s and slowly started coming down. The United Kingdom went up and even went higher for a longer period of time than came down. This was married by tariffs from the United States. So starting around the 50s through the 60s and the 2000s, tariffs had been coming down. So there was less income to our country from tariffs. So let's look at the U.S. average tariff rates between 1821 and 2016. 1820 through 1830, tariff of abominations happened and tariffs started coming down. Then you got the Morrill tariff, which increased the rates of the tariffs. The Underwood of 1913. Smoot-Hawley tariff, 1930. Trade agreement, 1934. GATT, 1947. And ever since the 1950s, tariffs have been coming down for both dutiable imports and total imports. What are dutiable imports? These are goods that are subject to import taxes or duties when brought into a country. Examples of dutiable imports include tobacco, plate glass, advertising materials. Now let's look at the U.S. trade balance and trade policy. 1895, high tariff rates, and even when they were low, they were still positive. Then here, 1971, the end of the Bretton Woods Agreement. The Bretton Woods Agreement was the time that the world recognized that the financial powerhouse was the United States, not Great Britain, and we took over as world reserve currency. 1971, end of the Bretton Woods Agreement, was when President Richard Nixon completely separated gold from our currency, changing us from money that was backed by precious metals to fiat money, backed by nothing, backed by promises. It no longer said gold certificate or silver certificate. It said Federal Reserve note. The Federal Reserve is not federal, and they have no reserve. This is a group of leading bankers and financiers. So subsequently, we had gone negative in the percent of GDP, and we have remained that way. You wonder why? Financially, things have gotten harder. Inflation's gone up. You can't use the same amount of money to buy what you used to buy. I've done many videos on this. One of my first ones is Worsening Trends Exposed. Please go watch it. You'll see what I mean. So who gained from globalization? The Asian middle class and the top 1%. The U.S. lower and middle class took a severe plummet. My dad always told me, and I had trouble believing him as a young man, the rich are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. I just thought he was upset because he wasn't as wealthy as other people. I was wrong. Dad was right. Dad always was right. And so was my grandfather. This right here are historical highlights from the IRS. 1962, President Lincoln brought in our very first income tax. Shocked? Yes, I was. And then I found out why. Because we needed money to support the war effort during the Civil War. 1867, public opposition to the income tax. 1872, income tax repealed. 1894, Wilson Tariff Act revived the income tax. 1865, the Supreme Court ruled the new income tax unconstitutional. 1909, President Taft recommended Congress propose constitutional amendment that would give the government the power to tax incomes without apportioning the burden among the states. 1913, Congress shall have the power to lay and collect taxes on incomes from whatever source derived without apportionment among the several states, without regard to any census or enumeration. They adopted a 1% tax on income more than $3,000 and a surtax of 6% on incomes more than $500,000. It repealed the 1909 corporate income tax, and the Form 1040 was introduced. 1918, Revenue Act of 1918 produced more sums of money for World War I. Now, I'm not going to go through every single one of these, but I will point out certain ones that I find are important. 1933, prohibition was repealed. The IRS again assumed the responsibility of alcohol taxation. 1942, Revenue Act of that year, hailed by President Roosevelt as the greatest tax bill in American history. 1943, Congress passed Current Tax Payment Act, requiring employers to withhold tax from employees' wages and remit them quarterly. 1944, Congress passed the Individual Income Tax Act. 1953, President Eisenhower endorsed Truman's reorganization plan and changed the name of the agency from the Bureau of Internal Revenue to the Internal Revenue Service. 1972, alcohol, tobacco, firearms separated from the IRS. 1986, limited electronic filing began. 1992, taxpayers who owed money were allowed to file electronically. 1998, IRS Reconstructing and Reform Act. IRS enacted reforms, ending its geographic-based structure, instituting 4 major operating divisions, the most sweeping change in the IRS since the 1953 organization. And the president that started the increased taxing and inflation was none other than Woodrow Wilson, who signed the Federal Reserve Act in 1913. Later, he expressed his regret about the bill, saying that he, quote, unwittingly ruined my country, end quote. You think so? The Federal Reserve Act established a banking system to manage money supply, make loans, and oversee other banks. It is led by appointment from the president. It established the Fed's dual mandate of price stability and jobs.